Hello, welcome to episode 6 of the Tom and John Show. Today we're fortunate to have Chris Brown, PSU alum, through our turf program, um, but decided to go a different direction in the golf industry and went into home lawn care, started his own business, and has had great success growing that business, and we are very happy that he's here to give some background as to how he got to where he is. And John, why don't you just set it up and we'll swap the ball across the net to Chris.
Good. All right. So thanks, Tom. Welcome everybody to episode 6. This is the first one of 2015. I think last year was kind of the trial and error time, you could say that, and I think we feel pretty good about it now, and we're going to try and make these more consistent and have some diverse guests. And I know we focused a lot on golf last year, but I think it's good that we have Chris from Teton Brown in here to talk about kind of his end of the business and going from turf and getting an education at Penn State and kind of learning from the golf business, but then spinning it and taking it over into lawn care. And so, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Just to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what I really want to hear at the beginning. I really want to hear how you got started. I mean, you don't hear a lot of students coming out of the program that are willing to take the leap to go into lawn care, and so we'd like to hear kind of the backstory on that.
Sure, well, there's a lot of backstory, and thanks for having me on, guys. And I know, Dr. Watchke, you're not going to recognize me by the clean backs of my hands, because when I was a student there, more often than not, there was a lot of stamp smudges.
I remember.
The morning after a rather late evening in your class with a big gulp full of coffee trying to keep me awake. But it was all good. So yeah, I graduated from the turf program back in '94, in the fall of '94, and I don't know what it was, but I think I've just kind of always had a bit of an entrepreneurial itch, and I got introduced to the turf business and the golf business by working summers at a golf course like so many other young guys, and just really loved it. Thought that the job seemed ideal for me. It was a little bit of inside, a little bit of outside. It's some management, it was some budgeting, it was a mix of things, which for my ADD-addled brain was perfect, or at least seemed perfect. So so I got into the superintendent at the course where I had worked was a Penn State grad. He went to the 2-year program, but he told me, you're not allowed in this business unless you go to Penn State. So I said, okay, let me go check that out. And I went through the 4-year program. But somewhere around, my 3rd year in the 4-year program, I started to kind of just have this entrepreneurial itch. I was just kind of thinking to myself, I don't know if managing a golf course is really what I want to do. I like the idea of starting up my own business or being a little bit more free to make my own decisions and not necessarily answering to a board and things like that. So it was something I was tossing around. And I remember sitting down with Dr. Watchke, who was my academic advisor at that point, and sort of expressing some of those concerns, which were unique at the time because pretty much every other guy in the program, there was a few girls in the program, but pretty much everybody in the program was going toward the golf course business, and it was just sort of a given that you were gunning for that position as a golf course superintendent. So I expressed some concerns, and Dr. Watchke was more than supportive about it, and said, there's a ton of ways to make money in this industry, and let's start looking at some of them. And so started to throw some ideas out about different companies and topsoil manufacturers, all different companies and different aspects of the industry that might be of interest. And right around that time, I had actually this is toward my last year now, an offer basically fell in my lap. A superintendent at a really good club back right near my home had been the assistant superintendent at the club where I worked when I was in high school, and he called up and said, my assistant's leaving, I know you're graduating this fall, if you want the job, it's yours. And it was that simple, and the offer he made me was, I know more than what anybody else was getting offered as they were coming out of school, and I thought, boy, I should really give this a try. I mean, this just fell in my lap. Maybe this is fate. Let me give this a try and see whether or not I actually like the golf course business, given as though I didn't even have to try and had this good offer as an assistant superintendent. So I went there, and after about a month realized this is not for me. I just I don't want to get into all the nitty-gritty detail, but I started to get a better sense of what a superintendent's job entailed. And I think when you're young in the industry, you're looking at the science aspect, managing the turf, managing the crew, and all that, and you don't see the behind-the-scenes stuff with the members and managing the member expectations and sort of the behind-the-scenes politicking that has to get done. It's just a necessary part of the job, and I just had no taste for that. And so when I started to get a sense of that, I realized I'm not going to enjoy this business. I'm not going to enjoy this job. I should probably just cut my losses. So about that time, my older sister was dating a guy who owned his own roofing business. And he had just, on his own, started up his own roofing business and was extremely successful. So I started bugging him and said, well, what does it take to get your own business started? I'd like to maybe get my own business started. And he said, basically just kept kicking me in the butt and saying, yeah, just go do it. And I was like, yeah, but how much money do I need to save up? He said, none. Just go do it. Just, get it going, And he was getting me to pull the trigger. But before I did that, he said, my younger brother works at the local Lawn Doctor franchise in Stamford, and he's one of their top salesmen. Why don't you go talk to him about it, about that end of the industry, and just see what he thinks? And so I went down, and basically almost within an hour or two, they were looking for another guy to help out, literally just pushing a spreader around out of a truck. It was about $100 a week less than what I was making at the golf course. And after talking to them for about half an hour, I took the job and went up and tendered my resignation at the golf course. And I was working, literally nobody else in the company had any turf background whatsoever. They were just guys that out of high school got a job pushing around a spreader at Lawn Doctor, and that was that. But the one thing that did intrigue me the most is that the owner of this Lawn Doctor franchise was earning well over $1 million a year. And I knew that no golf course superintendents that I had met at that point were making any kind of money like that. So I thought, let me go find out what this end of the industry is like. I don't care if I have to take a pay cut, whatever it is. And I did. And so I went and I worked for that franchise for about a year, and then left. And the Peter Teed, who was my sister's boyfriend's younger brother, was the salesman that he had turned me on to. He left about the same time, and the two of us decided to start up our own business, essentially offering similar type services, but with a slightly different angle. And it was kind of a marriage of street smarts and book smarts. And we just got out there, started knocking on doors, doing whatever we could do to get the word out that we were offering a service, putting out bills, whatever it might be. And then by the end of our first year, we had about 100 clients, and it just kind of never looked back.
What was different? What kind of set you apart in terms of the services? I remember being a student here at Penn State, and I started out in landscape contracting, and Dan Stearns, who still runs the program, he would talk about the differences in terms of are you going to just go out and try and get a ton of clients and do quantity, or are you going to try and be really high end and set yourself as this the high end group? Now we start seeing a lot of people doing organic services. Back then, what did you do to set yourself apart?
Well, back then it was definitely, there was an extreme lack of quality in the lawn care end of things, and that was something I was able to bring to the table with the scientific turf knowledge that really nobody in the lawn industry that we knew of really had that, at least in our area here. Yeah, I'm sure around the country there were guys, but in our area we just didn't know of any companies that were really on the radar screen who had scientific turf knowledge. I mean, I remember at Lawn Doctor, a lot of the guys there thought that ryegrass had rhizomes, and that's what rhizomes. That's what ryegrass is, and it was the best. So they, and that's all they bought was perennial rye, which worked for the lawn care companies because it grew really fast, and so the customers were happy. But getting a blend of bluegrasses and things like that into the mix just didn't occur to them because it just made it more expensive and it took longer to grow. So why would you do that? So coming at it with a bit more of a long-term thinking, scientifically minded, turf perspective was something that nobody was really doing. And so and talking to a lot of the customers when we were there at the Lawn Doctor franchise, a lot of them would say to us, it's like, I don't care what you charge me, I just want a better job than what's being done here. But the company was so set up to offer a very quick, in and out, get there, throw down the fertilizer, leave the bill, get to your next job. You got to get 25 jobs done a day, 30 jobs done a day. So it was a quantity thing, and I don't have too much of a problem with that. I think there's a niche for that type of service. People don't have a lot of money to spend, but they want the lawn to look a little better. They need some fertilizer on it. They need some weed control. Okay, great. But there was a base of customers out there who were looking to get a better quality service and didn't mind paying for it. And there didn't seem to be any companies who were really targeting those people, and so that's what we did.
So it wasn't really what we talked about in the pre-show, but thinking back to it, when you first got started, because we were in school together for a little bit, and then you left a little ahead of me. You were probably one of the first that started doing YouTube videos and all kinds of promotion and stuff. So tell me a little bit about your thought process from a business aspect in terms of, obviously you use that for marketing. What was your experience, kind of getting into that early on compared to a lot of other people?
I'd like to give myself a little more credit than I probably deserve and say I was ahead of my time on that. It was one of those things where what I realized pretty quickly in the business is that the mentality at the company where I was working before was very much, we know how to take care of this. Don't necessarily, customers will bug you for information. They'll bug you for questions. They're just trying to figure out how to do it themselves, so they don't need us to do it anymore. And that was sort of the mentality. And my feeling has always been, if they wanted to do it themselves, there's plenty of resources out there for them to go learn how to do it themselves. They're hiring us because they want us to do it. And so, hiding information sort of gives the impression that you've got something to hide. Whereas being forthcoming with information helps them feel more comfortable that you really know what you're doing. And so we would, really, before the YouTube videos and stuff, we would very aggressively put together newsletters and flyers and information sheets and things like that. So whenever a customer, you'd go to a lawn, let's say we had Red Thread on the lawn. We had a whole sheet printed up explaining exactly what Red Thread was, why it's there, why it's really not anything to worry about too much. It's, here's the seasonal situation, all these details. And I'd put a lot of effort into trying to put it all in layman's terms. And then we'd leave that for the customers. Just as a way to say, hey, we're on top of this, we see what's going on. And the feedback we got from all the newsletters and the efforts that we made to educate our customers was just overwhelmingly positive. So the YouTube videos that I did early on were sort of an extension of that. And to be honest, I never really took that too far. I kind of played with the concept, put it out there, didn't get a whole lot of feedback on it. But we're actually poised this coming year. I'm kind of revamping it now, where we've got a guy who's a actual professional videographer who's going to be coming in and producing some good educational videos with us that we can use both for, just to help educate our clients as to, different things, but also just anybody out there. And, my feeling is if somebody comes across one of our videos, sees us talking about it, even if they're not a client of ours, it kind of puts us in a position of showing that we do know what we're talking about. And that can only be good, for building a business.
Yeah. So you might go back to some more video, but what are you doing marketing-wise now? Like, what is, from a business standpoint for somebody that wants to get into it? Obviously you had probably a lot of challenges and some opportunities early on, but what do you see now as challenges and opportunities for you?
Are you talking like a new guy coming into the business?
Either, even just, somebody new that wants to do it. Maybe one of our students is interested and they see like golf course, I don't want to do that. Or maybe just from an established company, what are some of the challenges and opportunities? I imagine they're different. I imagine the challenges and opportunities for a recent grad trying to start up are different than your challenges and opportunities. So, just some insight from me.
I think defining the brand of your business and the goals of your business is really sort of paramount. And that's something that may take a few years before you sort of zero in on exactly what you want to do. And that's okay. But it's, it's one of those things where people need to sense or have an understanding of what your business is all about. In our neck of the woods, Teed & Brown is sort of known as the lawn care company for the people that our tagline is lawn care for distinctive homes, and that's really what we strive to offer. Just somebody wants to take that extra special care of their lawn. We are the guys to call, and that's a reputation we have around. I'll go around town. During the workday, I've got a shirt on, says Teed & Brown. I don't know if you can see on the camera there, but got the company name on there. And I've had people just kind of, Teed & Brown, how's the lawn care business going this year? I say, it's great. And then you notice Teed & Brown doesn't actually have the name lawn care anywhere in there, and it doesn't say it on the shirt. It just says Teed & Brown, but people know the brand, they know the name of the company. And that's something we spent, quite frankly, a lot of money with a marketing company to come up with. The original name of the company was Grassroots Lawn Care because we thought that was clever. But the marketing agency quite quickly realized that's fine and good, but number one, you sound kind of like every other company out there, and number two, it doesn't have any sort of ring to it that would indicate that you're a higher level of service. And so they basically, after we paid them a whole bunch of money, told us to just use our last names because they happened to sound good together. T. Brown, and it give it a very different sort of Old English, like established sounding name, and so that's what we want. But it's very strategic in terms of naming the company to try to give us that name and the brand image that reflected what we actually did, which is offering a better quality service.
Right. The other thing is that in this day and age, and anytime there's the slightest bit of emphasis on the word team, it sells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I know I'm not a marketing guru by any stretch, but I think that combination of using the name and leaving out anything like a root or grass even is almost redundant in the market these days.
Yeah.
Everybody tries to shift one word over here and another word over there, but at the end of the day, it's all the same.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's great branding.
Well, I'm glad to hear you think that. but it actually has. I mean, it's worked out really well too. In the sort of the old cliche, the proof is in the pudding. In terms of marketing, we don't do a lot of marketing nowadays. The brand is sort of out there, and we get a lot of phone calls every spring and every fall as the summer has done its damage on the lawns. And we're sort of just able to keep up with the number of requests for proposals as it is. And now it wasn't like that to begin with. To begin with, we spent a lot of money on advertising, direct mail. That was a primary way of doing it. Trying to encourage customer word of mouth. Lots of things like that. And nowadays, the only advertising we do is we do have some click ads out there on Google that generate some leads. But I'd say the majority of our leads come from customer referrals and just people who've heard about us over the years and figured they'd try to give us a shot.
Are you?
Was a pretty I hate to use the word easy, but it was not as challenging to manage turf as the previous 2 years have been, and I'm wondering whether you could sense any impact with regard to customer satisfaction, and or did they just arbitrarily, oh boy, you guys have had an easy year, it rained every 3 days or whatever, that old line. But
I think
clearly, but I'm interested in knowing what, even though it was really a good year, what was the problems agronomically, just to step back into that pond.
Well, in the lawn care end of things, we always have problems, and those problems are largely because properties are too shady, the soil's really bad, there's a lot of things that are a little bit outside of our control. All we can really do is offer guidance to the customers and maybe refer them to landscapers or tree guys or things like that to help out. So what happens in our business is that there's a lot of effort, and I think the same thing in the golf course, but there's a lot of effort put into educating the clients as to what the specific problems on their lawn are and why we may or may not be able to help them with those problems.
Yeah.
Like I said, shade is a big thing. Really poor soil. Sometimes, you'll have contractors who will build the house, and it'll be just a dusting of topsoil, if you can even call it topsoil, on top of rock. Yeah. And then sod laid on top of that, and that's it. And you stick a soil probe in, and you're just clinking into rock, an inch down, and it's what are we going to do about that? So fertilizer's not going to help that.
Right.
So that's the sort of thing that those are the sort of problems we're always going to have in our business. But what we actually do strategically, if only so that we can kind of point back to it in harder years, is in the newsletters that we provide for our customers and in all the correspondence, we make it a point to emphasize, boy, it's been an easy year this year, and the weather's really cooperated, and we're really happy about that, and your lawn's looking good, and the fertilizers have all helped, but boy, this year's been nice to us. Because we want to be able to, a year from now, if it's a brutal year, and we're trying to point out that, hey, it's been 100 degrees for 2 weeks straight and no rain, when they come back with, well, you're just making excuses. At least they can pull out a newsletter from last year and say, well, look, we give credit when it's due to the weather. Now you got to, it's a, we only have so much control over things.
Right.
And that's sort of the constant game we play. And, like a superintendent has much more control over the property in terms of the irrigation and the mowing habits and the species of grass planted and the topsoil. They can fix a lot more things than we can. So we end up having to explain to customers very often why, we're not able to get their lawn looking like, Augusta
Right.
after, just 7 applications a year.
Well, right, and in the lawn care business, you have such a dependence on the client to deliver the maintenance practices, as you point out. Where in a golf course, that you have a pretty strong control in that regard, and consequently, a lot of those things that you listed before become very chronic on a home lawn. You can tell them you need to cut down that 80-foot oak tree. If you're really serious about having anything but Poatrivialis under it, and they're not gonna, because that's a signature tree in their lawn.
Yeah.
It's all about education and communication. So it always does boil down to.
Chris, you got any good stories of funny things that you've seen along the way or experienced with the homeowners aren't always usually the most educated, and so sometimes the requests can be pretty crazy. You got anything, any unusual requests or anything? Not to throw any of your clients under the bus, but.
We've had some definitely unusual ones over the years. We've had, one client did ask us to put in a real golf green for him. And and he was one of these guys that could have paid for it. I mean, he had the money. He's not, it wasn't even an issue of, you have no idea what you're going to spend. For him, if I said, yeah, it'll be $200,000 to build the golf green and $25,000 a year to maintain it, he would have, yeah, fine, whatever. Must be nice, right? And so but he wanted us to do it, and I just told him absolutely not. And he said, well, why not? Why not? And I said, well, number one, you're not going to get anybody to maintain this thing who actually knows how to maintain a golf green. And he knew about my golf course background. He's like, well, what about you? I said, I'm not coming down to your property 5 times a week check on your green. It's just it's not a way to grow my business. And so that was a little unique. He ended up having another company put in an artificial one, which I told him was the best way to go. Just get an artificial one, and they've got some decent artificial turf out there, and then the maintenance headaches out of your hair, and you're good. But I did have one, and I remember actually, Dr. Watchke, you helped me out on this one. I doubt you remember it because it was really early on. But we signed up a client, and she said, okay, I've got a landscaper who's been doing the fertilizing. He's doing a terrible job, and he clearly didn't know what he was doing with that end of things. So she said, I'm just going to tell him he's got to cut out that whole aspect and just do the mowing. And I said, okay. Now, it's always not, you always run the risk of pissing off other companies that when you take the business, but that's part of business. We're going to pick up clients, we're going to lose clients, it's part of it. So we did that, and sure enough, about 2 weeks later, she called up and said, I don't know what you guys did. We had done our initial application. And actually, we picked up this client in the summertime, and she already had the beginnings of a grub outbreak, and we were finding some grubs in the lawn, so we hit it with some Dilox. And about 2 weeks later, she calls up and says, I don't know what you put down the lawn, but it's burning it all over the place. And I thought, geez, Dilox, and it was a granular, on the shredded corn cob carrier. And, when we put it down, we put the right amount down. Usually at the end, if you accidentally put too much down, at the end, it's like, oh boy, I went through 3 times more than I should have there. But no, it was a good application. And I thought, well, that's odd. Let's come take a look. So we came out and took a look. And there was a yellow streak about 3 feet wide, starting from one side of the house, sort of weaving its way through the yard, and then ending up on another part. And I thought, that's really odd. So we went and took a look, and then as I walked along, I looked at it, and it was pretty clear that the yellow browning was in the perfect pattern of a fan spray if someone was taking a backpack sprayer and doing a back and forth as they walked. Okay, you could see the way the grass was dying. It was a perfect fan spray. So I thought, all right, it looks like somebody sprayed something here, and I know we didn't spray anything that would have caused that. So then I looked and saw that the pattern started right by a water spigot and ended right at the fence going out into the driveway. So somebody filled up with Roundup or something, and I'm guessing, I never had any proof, but I'm guessing it was the landscaper. And he filled up with, kind of as a screw you sort of thing to us, and he walked around the yard, sprayed Roundup all around, and then ended up over there by the driveway. So I took a look at it, we figured out what it was, and then I said, and I explained it to her, and she just refused to believe me. Said, no, that's not what's going on here. He wouldn't do that. And I said, well, maybe not, but somebody did something wrong here, and that wasn't us. We don't walk in some sort of random weird pattern through the yard. So then she had a tree guy come take a look at it who has no knowledge of turf, and he told her that it appears as though after we put down the dye locks, a heavy rain caused it all to wash to those areas and burn the grass in that pattern. And by the way, the pattern went up and down hills in the yard and everything like that. And so I said, so I got in touch with this guy and I said, look, explain to me how it would potentially, number one, what you're describing has never happened before in the history of the world. Number two, how on earth would it wash it all to this perfectly weird line going around the yard, up and down inclines and things like that? And the only response he could give me is, well, why would somebody sabotage it like that? And I said, yeah, I don't know. There's mentally ill people out there, but I know that what you're describing couldn't possibly happen. So what I did do is I said, let me try this. And I took some photographs and I mailed them to Dr. Watsky. This is before you could email photographs.
I remember this. I think
you remember? Okay, great. This is about 20 years ago almost.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I hate to bother you, but could you just give me your input? And I figured if I could show up with a copy of a book that Dr. Watsky had written, plus a letter from him saying, here's what's going on. And sure enough, you wrote back and said this is clearly Roundup burn, that somebody had walked through the yard and sprayed Roundup on the property. So I showed up and gave her that, and unfortunately, you weren't able to convince her either, Dr. Watsky.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But I soon realized, and it was a good lesson, it was early on in business, that in many cases, customers are really just going to believe whatever's most convenient for them to believe, because believing that we had screwed up means it's on us to fix it,
Right.
without any real recourse. So we ended up, just to keep the customer, we went and aerated the heck out of that area, seeded it, and sure enough, got new grass in there, and it ended up okay. But it was kind of interesting to see how it was such an obvious circumstance, and the customer just wouldn't believe us. And it was going on the word of a guy who's basically his background is forestry, over Dr. Watsky, one of the leaders in the scientific turf industry.
Go figure.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me, but
No.
hey, we're almost out of time. But I wanted to get to one last point before we get out of here, which was, so you started the company probably 20 years ago. You just said. How do you deal with the different stages of growth to keep the business proactive and moving forward, but also like rein it in so that you can manage it? What are your suggestions, or how did you handle that?
Yeah, the only thing I can say is that we're actually coming up against a new, what I would call a new stage of growth, where, and this is something that I've only kind of just figured out looking back on the past 20 years, and that is, when you first start, when it's just you or just you and a partner, in my case, it's pretty easy. The two of you get together, you go out, you do the work, you come back, you send the bills out, you cash the checks, it's all great. Then you get to a point where you need to start hiring people to help you if you're doing well and you're getting bigger. And you got to trust some of those people to do the work correctly. So you train them as well as you can, and you take it that way. And then eventually you're going to have to get it. If you want to keep growing the business, you're going to have to get it to the point where you're not needed to be on the jobs, or not on every job. Maybe just going around checking up on things, going out and keeping an eye on the employees. But you've got to be able to add extra crews without babysitting everybody. And still maintain the quality. And that's a difficult hurdle to overcome, going from you doing all the work to other people doing all the work while still maintaining the quality. And that was probably the first big hurdle we had to overcome. And that probably took about 5 years to really get to that point where we were able to manage crews and have them do a good job and instill the same sense of keeping the quality high as we were able to do, just the two of us. So that kept going, and then sort of once we got to that point, we were comfortable there. It was sort of smooth sailing until we got up to about 14 employees or so. And then what we started realizing is it becomes a bit of a new dynamic. When you've got about that many employees, it's a little bit like the old cliche herding cats. It becomes much harder to keep an eye on everything, and because you got this guy who's coming in late, and well, if you don't punish him properly, then everybody else comes in late, because why, if he can come in late, why can't I come in late? You start getting all these internal issues popping up, and you're always going to have a bad apple or two in the bunch, and so you have to weed them out, and it becomes much more difficult to manage. It's much more difficult to manage 14 guys than it is to manage 6 or 7 guys. And so if you want to keep growing further than that, you've got to sort of take that next step, and that's what we ended up hiring a business manager who was a former golf course superintendent last year, and he's able to keep much more fingers in with what the guys are doing, so that my partner can spend his time doing sales and customer relations. I can spend my time sort of managing the back office and doing other things that need to get taken care of. And then also, moving into larger spaces. As you get bigger and bigger, you have more trucks. You're taking deliveries of more fertilizer and things like that. We're in a part of the country where real estate is extremely expensive. So sort of looking ahead to realize we're going to need to set aside X number of dollars to be able to get a new building at some point. It's a big part of your planning strategy. And so, I would just say that I know a lot of guys who, when they got to the point where they were going to have to hire employees and let them do the work, they tried it, were unsatisfied with the results, and just bailed on it and continued to do all the work themselves. And that's perfectly fine if that's their strategy, but you're never going to grow very big that way. It's always going to be dependent on how much work you can do yourself. And if that's the way you enjoy doing your work, that's I'm certainly not looking down on that. But I wanted to grow this business bigger, and I realized that wasn't going to be able to work for us. So if somebody's in the position of wanting to grow their business to a larger size, you do have to overcome some of those hurdles. And it's not going to be easy, but it's just one of those things. When you get there, realize that it's a growing pain that every business goes through, and you got to figure out your way through it. But if you can, if you have resources, if you know somebody else who's already done it, if or even if you're a young guy out there trying to start a business and you're running into those issues, feel free to call me. I love talking business. I love talking turf with anybody, especially Penn State grads. But yeah, there's just this next hurdle of trying to get ourselves to the point where we can manage a large number of guys and still maintain the quality is our big challenge that we're undertaking right now. And I'm having some fun with it, but it's definitely challenging. And I'm curious as to where I think the next big step after that is going to be setting up multiple locations. Whether we do that via franchising or have central office managed multiple locations, but that's a whole different business management strategy that I look forward to adopting when that time comes.
Good.
Yeah.
Well,
That'll be a good problem to have.
I hope we have that problem to deal with. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you and kind of let you take us out of this. And Chris, I just want to say thanks for coming on and kind of sharing a different perspective. I think it's great. We don't talk about lawn care enough, and it really is a viable and good business for a lot of our graduates. So.
Well, I think so, and thank you very much for having me on here. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks again, Chris, and kudos to you and your success, and may it continue.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll wrap up episode 6, and we look forward to episode 7. We have to kind of put some stuff together, Tom, and bring that up. But we look to have these a little bit more consistent this year with another round of great guests, just like Chris. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and thanks again.
Thanks.